Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I guess we are happy today because we are all here for the same cause, because we believe that we have to say no to this current predominant problem in our society, that is racism. I think every one of us we are very aware of this issue, especially in recent some of the few recent cases that happened in our society, such as the article written by one professor, Redwan T, for example, which was published by the newspaper Sinar. And also the screening of this very racist movie about Tanda Putra. Even though the cabinet had put a stop on it, but I think the government wanted to screen it to the Felda settlers. And what does it mean? I mean, we understand that there must be some underlying reason for such an action. And we are concerned that this country, as has been said by Gerald just now in the video, that we have not ratified ICET yet for 40 years. And out of, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are only 15 countries, apart from North Korea and Angola, we are one of it, And 175 has ratified. They have ratified ICET, and we are still reluctant to certify this ICET. What is the problem with this country? Right? And yet, we hold a chair at the United Nations Human Rights Council. And the first article, the Human Rights Council, is about equality. Right? It's about non-discriminatory equality. And yet, we have a chair at the Human Rights Council, and we fail to ratify ICET. So I don't understand this paradox between the two. Yeah, I think that's all that I want to say as opening. And I think I would like to probably invite all the other panelists to come here, because we have a very formidable list of panelists, well-known civil society leaders, Marina Chiwi, Dr. Kwa Kesong, Gerald, Dr. KJ John, Zaid. Yeah, Zaid Ibrahim. Please come over. Thank you. Yeah, I guess to start the session, I would like to give the microphone to Datin Paduka Marina Malde to start the session.
Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. Great to see so many people here this afternoon. I guess this is a subject that everyone is concerned about, and I guess everyone is pretty much on the same page on. I guess we're all here because we support the fight against racism and would like to see ICET ratified, signed and ratified. I'm assuming. I mean, it would be interesting. There were people who didn't agree with it here. Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm really not sure how much I can add to the debate. We have such a big array of speakers, and I don't know how to differentiate from everyone, but I just wanted to make a few points, very short points actually, about racism in general and ICET in particular. And I know I've said this many times before, and in my last column I said that as well, that if Malaysians were just left alone, generally, we would get on pretty well, and we have done for a long time, as long as we all feel that we have an equal chance at the opportunities to enjoy the fruits of our country's development. And I think that's the root of it all, having an equal chance at all the opportunities, regardless of race or religion. And therein, in fact, Jared Diamond, I like to quote in his book Collapse, how societies choose to fail or succeed, says that very often we might express conflict or anger, etc., as racial and tribal differences, but the root cause is almost always economic. So just a few points I'd like to make about the issue of racism. I was going to say tourism. I don't know why. Isms, too many isms. When we speak about fighting racism, I think we have to be clear that we must mean that we will fight it wherever it occurs. Too often I see the very same people who complain about racial discrimination upon themselves blithely practicing it upon others. And sometimes I think it might be unconscious, but just because one has been a victim of racism doesn't give you the right to then practice the same to others. It makes as much sense as former Holocaust victims supporting the violent suppression of Palestinians, for example. Now, unfortunately, I find this quite often in Malaysia, and you see it a lot on social media, for instance, if you're online as much as I am. Those who feel most victimized then feel they can stereotype others with impunity, while those who belong to the so-called dominant racist groups feel they cannot say anything about it, even though they themselves do not support the original racism. We need to take a hard look at ourselves to ensure that two wrongs do not make a right, ever, ever. And only then will any anti-racism movements have any meaning. Secondly, when we fight racism, we must sincerely fight it against anyone, not just Malaysians. I'm disappointed to find that some people may disapprove heartily of racism against fellow Malaysians, but cannot see anything wrong with the way we speak about Africans, Indonesians, or any foreigners who come from countries poorer than ours. And I think poorer is is the operative word here, because we don't seem to have the same attitudes towards people who come from richer countries than ours. Our newspapers and TV seem to have no qualms about calling Africans awang hitam or Negro, or Indonesians Indon and Bangladeshis Bangla. And a lot of people say, well, that's just a shortened form. But in fact, if you ask Indonesians particularly, they don't like it. They think of it as derogatory. Employers complain about having to provide foreign workers with accommodation and food, as if they were not human beings who need both in order to work here. The dehumanizing of the other, which is essentially what racism is all about, is very pervasive, yet it goes unremarked. We need to become more conscious of this tendency, because we cannot assume that foreigners within our midst cannot read or understand what we say. How different would that be to how we feel if in other countries we heard their natives refer to us as nignogs? Again, I repeat, the fight is against racism of any kind towards anyone, not just our own people. Thirdly, racism is of course related to phobias about particular religions, especially in our country when the two are often conflated with one another. We sometimes hear otherwise liberal people saying things which can only be rooted in deeply embedded Islamophobia. Our vernacular papers are often filled with blatant Christianophobia. I have friends who find that various bureaucrats refuse to believe that they are born Muslim just because they are Chinese. And I know from experience how kids in public schools can be turned into religio racists within a very short time, because I saw that happen with my own daughter. Thus, when we fight against racism, we must also look at religious support for equality in order to counter those who would try and provide so-called religious justifications for discrimination. No religion supports inequality and injustice. Fourthly, the evil twin of racism is sexism. Again, those who feel discriminated against have no qualms about railing against it in the most sexist manner. For example, in the case of the listen case, I was disappointed to see that some of the comments about Sharifah Zora's undoubtedly inappropriate behavior was racist and sexist. For instance, there was a cartoon showing Batman slapping a woman saying, "Listen, listen, listen." If we are going to give up racism only to get sexism instead, then I don't think we would have moved forward at all. So we need to fight both and make both unacceptable in our society. It's therefore appropriate for us to advocate that Malaysia signs and ratifies ICERT, However, we must do it, firstly, with no reservations, because we love having reservations. And secondly, by also lifting all reservations we have on CEDAW and on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Human rights cannot be subdivided and isolated from one another. We must accept equality as a whole and not just on some issues and not on others. As it is, our reservations on CEDAW and the CRC are all based on perceived conflicts with Sharia law. These reservations may thus also be seen as a form of discrimination against a group of people based on their religion, race, and sex. Thus, for ICER to have full meaning, it cannot be separated from those other conventions which we have not yet fully accepted. I hope, therefore, that work on ratifying ICER will not be done in isolation from ongoing work to lift reservations on CEDAW and the CRC. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the short and very sweet talk just now. And I think I'll pass over to the President of the Bar Council, Lim Chiwi. Probably he has some slides to show and to present stock. Thank you.
Thanks, Farouk. I'm going to come from a legal perspective on this issue. And all of you would have read in the press about the government's position or intention to introduce the National Harmony Act. So I want to talk about the National Harmony Act, and then I want to talk about the state of our accession to ICER and what the Attorney General and the ministers are talking about it. But first, let's deal with the National Harmony Act. First slide, thanks, Ehsan. I'm kind to the government. It's not flip-flop, flip-flop. It's actually flip-flop-flip. And this is how the issue played out over time in the last 4 years. Could you put it all together? Thanks. Back in September 2008, at that time, Shafi Abdul, now Rural Minister, then Minister in charge of Unity, said that the government was united about having such a law as race relations is not a small matter to be taken lightly. Syed Hamid Albar, at the time Home Minister, said that Cabinet unanimously agreed on the necessity of a law to govern race relations. Then that's where the flop comes in a year or two later. Next slide. We have Shafi Abdul then saying race relations is something that cannot be forced upon the people through legislation. That's why everyone in Cabinet agreed that there was no need for such an act. Nazri then says this act was a bid to promote interaction among the races and foster mutual respect among Malaysians with the purpose of combating racial extremism. So 2 years later, there's a change of heart. So what exactly is this creature that the government has in mind called at first Race Relations Act, now National Harmony Act? Next slide. This is what Nazri says. I'm reading it out for you, for those of you who can't see it up front. He says this, and I quote, "With this new act, we will be better equipped to manage our national fault lines. It will also help to strengthen national cohesion by protecting national unity and nurturing religious harmony. The new provisions proposed in the National Harmony Act will place emphasis on nurturing the spirit of harmony and mutual respect in the multiracial and multi-religious Malaysian society. The new act will be more specific and allow us to act against those who use sensitive issues to undermine national harmony." I pause here to say that the Prime Minister has announced that the Sedition Act will be, I think he used the word repealed. So then the question is, what happens to all those offences of causing ill will on the various grounds of race, religion, and all that? And bearing in mind also, the Penal Code has equally applicable provisions on the whole issue of causing chaos based on race. And I'll talk about religion shortly in the context of how the National Harmony Act will face an obstacle if it tries to criminalize hate speech relating to religion. So that is the words of the minister. In terms of drafting, of course, the Attorney General's Chambers is, in fact, drafting it at the moment as we speak. But because of the impending GE, I can't see consultation process even starting now. I really can't even see it starting even shortly after GE, depending on the outcome. But we're probably then looking not at the first sitting of Parliament after the GE, probably at the second sitting, then we're looking at the last quarter of this year. So really, this is something that which will just take a long time to come to fruition for the simple reason we have the pending GE, we have the government committing itself to consultation as to this creature called the National Harmony Act. And so far as where the government's coming from on this legislation, I stand guided by what the Director General of the relevant department has to say on this. Next slide. Dr. Azman, at the recent Attorney General Chambers conference on political transformation, he presented a few slides where I spoke at it as well. And this is what he says. He lays out the challenges relating to the legislation. Quite rightly, he talks about diverse society, demanding for their rights to be observed, talks about how there's a challenge of segregation, high social mobility, exploitation of sensitive issues. And this is how he intends to approach it. Next slide. Again, sorry, the next slide. These are further challenges which everyone in this hall will know all about. Now, he thinks this is what the legislation should look at. Clarity, fair implementation, equality, that's in Article 8 of our federal constitution, includes religion, but like maybe at this stage I explain the legal obstacle. Section 298A of the Penal Code was previously struck down as being unconstitutional because religion is state jurisdiction. So if the government under this National Harmony Act would try to legislate or criminalize anything that relates to religion, that may have a constitutional challenge. That may face a constitutional challenge. And we should then require state legislature to come on board as well for all the 13 states. Then we have facilitate debate and punitive action. I hope that it's jumping in your mind, even at this stage, why do we need legislation for national harmony? What would legislation do for harmony? And then if you ask yourself the question, hopefully you lead to the next question. And the next question will be, if you're going to have legislation on national harmony or race relation, the fundamental principle must surely be two pillars. First of which, discrimination. It has to be anchored on anti-discrimination. Second of which, it must be criminalization of hate speech. If you ask yourselves those two questions, then you will then ask yourself, which country has a model legislation on these two issues? And the country which has the model legislation on these two issues is none other than the United Kingdom with their Equality Act, wherein a few years ago, they brought together all the various disparate legislation dealing with all these issues, brought it all together into the Equality Act. Their discrimination deals with direct, indirect discrimination, and of course, with hate speech. Now, if you then deal with hate speech, to what extent can you take out the relevant provisions in our Sedition Act and then transport it or incorporate it into the National Harmony Act? You can do that, but our legislation on this issue has been abused. Most of you would have read about the Kapal Singh decision in the Court of Appeal, where the Court of Appeal found that it is not necessary for the prosecution to show whether what Kapal said would result in what the prosecution say is the intention of the legislation. And so it is there that we, the Bar Council, are pushing the Attorney General to say that if you are going to take parts of the Sedition Act, then the additional element you must introduce to any hate speech is that that hate speech must give rise to a likely situation that it may cause or incite a riot or ill feelings and so on. It must have that additional, what we call the objective assessment. And if so, then Kapal Singh would not have been dragged through the courts as we know it today. And that is why if you look at the whole history of the Sedition Act, the relevant provisions of the Penal Code, it is subject to abuse. If you look at the whole list of the cases, it's been subject of abuse by the public prosecutor. Next slide. So I've already indicated it has to be two twin pillars of hate speech and discrimination, and of course the model legislation is UK. I just want to address the second last issue. It is this. Some of you in the room will be wondering, look, if we were to accede to ICERD, what about all those policies that favor Bumiputra? Okay, next slide. I've set out there admission to universities, scholarships, employment, government contracts, low-cost housing, corporate equity, residential properties. These are, of course, we all know, some of which may not be consistent with, or rather goes beyond Article 153, but ICERD does recognize exceptions to discrimination, and it is in this provision. Next slide. Article 2, where it says that state parties shall, when the circumstances so warrant, take in the social, economic, cultural, and other fields, special and concrete measures to ensure the adequate development and protection of certain racial groups or individuals belonging to them for the purpose of guaranteeing them the full and equal enjoyment of human rights and freedom, fundamental freedoms. So that, because of that provision, there is really no obstacle to the Malaysian government signing on or acceding to ICERD. So, query, why haven't we done so? So far as the universal periodic review exercise that takes place, the government's position on paper, in writing, is that there's been a cabinet committee set up to look into it, and it is recommending that we do ratify the convention. Then the next question is, why is it taking us so long? It is taking us so long because the Attorney General takes the position, both privately and publicly, that before we sign on to another convention, he wants to ensure our domestic legislation is amended in place consistent with the convention, as opposed to signing on first, then amend your domestic legislation, which is what most countries in the world do. And that is also the reason why we have yet to sign on to the International Criminal Court, ICC. So, and notwithstanding, our Minister in charge of law, Nazri, openly pledged signing on to ICC, I think it was almost 2 years ago. So this is the reasons why this is happening. And of course, the next round of UPR, Universal Periodic Review, I think is taking place in October this year in Geneva. So I wonder what more we can say to delay signing on to this convention. So I hope I've laid down in very broad terms the legal position on race relations. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiwi. I think Chiwi raised a very important point just now about law reform, that we need to criminalize hate speech, and that's the problem that we have in our country, right? And you see, like in England, like Chiwi pointed out correctly, even the captain of England soccer team, the national soccer team, John Terry, was being brought to the to the council for the FA for his presumably he uttered a very racist remark to Rio Ferdinand, if I'm not mistaken, right? There's a MU supporter over here. Yeah. So now we here in Malaysia, you can utter a lot of racist statements and accusations, and yet you just get scot-free. And we have heard this from one guy from the video just now, right? A very well-known guy of Perkasa, right? I have to name him and shame him, right? Yeah, so that people will know that he's a very racist person with a very racist agenda. And now we even have another racist group, so-called Islamic group, no Ikram, but a sister, a very young Islamic group who wanted to form and call of a party to participate in this 13th general election, and I think we all know them, that they are the, how do I say, the main proponent for Himpun. You have heard about Himpun, right? You still remember about that Himpun? That congregation at that stadium. Yeah, about around the country. Yeah, and what is their agenda? Melayu sepakat, Islam berdaulat. What does that mean? It's very racist, isn't it? Even the tagline is very racist itself. And you know, like recently they have this a cartoon with Dong Zong, a devil, and written there Dong Zong, and like playing puppets of DAP and MCA, and then PAS and UMNO were fighting against each other. No, they're trying to play these racial cards. It's very sad. And we are in the 21st century, and yet these people are saying their slogan as Arus Baru. What Arus Baru is this? This is Arus Berkelada, and it's not Arus Baru at all.